studio, 365 Sports. Pat Smith, three-man front, and also a part of a monster sports talk radio station, WJOX, joins us on 365 Sports. Pat, thanks for your time. We appreciate your time. The SEC meetings, obviously a lot of eyeballs, a lot of big bangers are talking. Anything in particular, a couple of 2 or 3 thoughts on what has jumped out the most to you?
Well, one thing's for sure. First off, always a pleasure to be with you guys. 34 days away from Texas and Oklahoma officially being a part of the conference. All the entourages are in Destin for the first time, being involved in all the meetings. Just a couple of things that really jumped out over the last 24 hours. One is that Greg Sankey has pretty much telegraphed that there's not going to be much news made this week, basically because of the House settlement last week. That is something that obviously has dominated the conversation amongst all of college athletics. So that is going to be something that he's just not going to have much to talk about or much to add. And as far as the schedule goes, guys, the last couple of years, it's been a debate between 8 and 9 games inside the SEC. Now, last year, it was a feeling that the conference was going to move to 9 conference games as opposed to keeping the 8. Well, what happened is they left Destin. ESPN would not pay them additional monies for that extra conference game. So the conference decided we'll stay at 8 until ESPN is going to come back to the table. So they put out a schedule for the next 2 years with an 8-game schedule. So really there's not much of a debate going on down in Destin in regards to what's happening with this conference because the schedule seems dead. You can't really comment on anything because of the House settlement. So there's a lot of what ifs, but main thing is that Oklahoma and Texas are soon to be in the league.
Pat, Greg Sankey is I'll just call him a confusing individual sometimes. And today, I mean, like he either sounds like he's out on the forefront of things or he's causing, certain things destruction. And then sometimes he says things like he did today about employment. Well, I mean, yeah, nobody wants to pay taxes, Pat, but they're the fees we have to pay so that we can be adults. So would they rather just go back to not having any money and not paying any taxes?
Well, one thing's for sure, he is very deliberate in what he says and how he says it when he says it. Think about yesterday when he spoke to the media for 40 minutes when he got to Miramar Beach, and he basically said, look, I think Congress still has an opportunity here because they just settled this big lawsuit with House and those other lawsuits that they believe now that Congress should step in and they should pass laws and they should try to help out this fledgling organization that's the NCAA. At the end of the day, I think we can all agree that the players are going to get paid, not only those in this settlement, but moving forward, these athletic departments are going to have to come up with between $20 and $25 million a year that typically they would be able to go build a new weight room or build a new softball complex or whatever the case may be. And Commissioner Sankey right now, he's having to answer a lot of questions from chancellors and presidents saying, okay, now we've agreed to this. Now where's our extra income going to come from so that we can still be on top of things along with the Big Ten in regards to this money machine that we produce every year. So it's definitely a step backwards. And when you hear Commissioner Sankey, once again, he's very guarded in what he potentially says. But I do agree with your assessment in regards to the way that he approaches things, that some days it does seem like that he is on the forefront of things that are going to potentially change in this business and then maybe a day behind things. And I think what's going on now with the NCAA House settlement, it's got everybody kind of thrown for a loop.
What's it like to see the Sooners and the Longhorn folks rolling around there? I know it's not like media days with this big throng of players and even fans to some extent. It's administration officials like that. But what's it like to have them not quite official, but pretty much officially a part of the party?
It is interesting, and you guys know it better than we do. But I think the most interesting aspect for Texas coming in the league is the fact that, Texas always believes of themselves to be a lot bigger, or I guess the biggest dog in the conference. Mm-hmm. And now they're walking into a conference where there's a lot of blue bloods in the SEC. And so, where are they going to fit into the hierarchy? And listen, they got a great team this year. I think everybody will agree that they're probably going to be a top 3, easily a top 5 team. They're probably going to be favored when we get together in Dallas at SEC Media Days. They're probably going to be number 2 behind the Georgia Bulldogs. So that's kind of the interesting aspect to this, because obviously the media is leaning into it. But, the administrators and everybody, they've been in Destin the last couple of years. It was just interesting seeing Coach Sark wearing shorts and a hoodie, walking around in the hotel. That was a pretty interesting sight. But for the most part, I think most SEC folks are very excited about having both of those schools in the conference. Now, it might be a different story 6 months from now after you get a little bit of taste of especially Texas fans.
Pat, what do you think comes out of this week that will be or will be new when they have SEC Media Days at the Omni in downtown Dallas in mid-July?
I think one thing, the heavy discussion that I keep hearing, guys, is that, LSU already does this. But Greg Sankey has kind of hinted about, and I know that there's been some working groups about the possible implementation of college athlete availability reports. We see that in the NFL. I'm not really sure if the Big 12 does that or not. I think maybe the ACC may. But as of right now, LSU is the only school that on Thursday, they're going to let everybody know up front, okay, this is who we have available. This is who is not going to be able to practice or not going to be available for the game on Saturday. I think because betting has become so mainstream and there's obviously some opportunities for different schools and the SEC wants to try to stay above the board, I think that's one of the major conversations that they're having in Destin this week. So maybe when you get to Dallas in about a month from now, maybe there's a little bit more movement there, because I would think ultimately Greg Sankey would love for the whole entire conference to adopt to what LSU has, to be very upright in regards to who's available and not available in regards to injuries.
Pat Smith with us on 365 Sports.
Do you think that would something maybe be better legislated overall by all the conferences once the settlement has kind of passed and gotten
Absolutely.
Through?
Yep, absolutely. Yep. And the reason why is because you guys know it as well as anybody. I mean, it is such big business. And since the Supreme Court knocked that down a couple years ago, it's also interesting that of all the states that touch each other in the Southeastern Conference, the state that I live in Birmingham, Alabama, we're the only state that does not have a lottery. We're the only state that does not allow sports gambling. And if you ask any FBI agent, they're going to tell you that Birmingham, Alabama, outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, has the biggest, illegal bookmaking business in the world. I mean, it's just crazy. So I think and it's all said and done, I think they would love for a brand new NCAA to dictate that policy. So it is across the board where it's not just the SEC or a couple schools doing it, but it's across the main Power Four schools especially.
Pat, did it dawn on anybody that Nick Saban wasn't the Alabama head coach rolling through there? I know there's, other new faces as well, but was that, just strange at all to see Kalen DeBoer in place of Nick Saban?
Yeah, it's taken a lot of time for folks to get used to that. Of course, Nick is in and out of Tuscaloosa a good bit. He's been on the golf tour circuit in regards to a lot of the charities and things that he's been involved in the 17 years that he was the head coach at Alabama. So, yes, it is definitely different having Kalen DeBoer stand behind a lectern and discuss the issues about this Alabama football team. But one thing's for sure, this conference has a lot of difference. I mean, like I said, Oklahoma and Texas coming in, no Saban this year. You've got a quarterback at the University of Georgia that's suing the head football coach at the University of Florida. So there's still a lot of drama going on around the league. But one thing's for sure, we all kind of miss the Nick Sabans of him kind of preaching and dictating to us policy on certain things. And there's no doubt that we miss kind of Nick Saban holding court on day one of SEC Media Days down in Destin.
There's never been a doubt that the SEC, when they started racking up one national title after another and then what has become just a chunk of them, but even if there was a year that they didn't win a national title, or even right before the start of the surge of LSU and Florida that eventually Saban, that they had everybody's back within the conference, that the conference was as strong as they protected a South Carolina or a Vanderbilt or a Mississippi State or whoever at the time was down near the bottom. Do you think that will always be the case, or if they get bigger and money gets more, that they could ever be where they forget about who was a part of the original conference? Not the one that goes back to Tulane, but the one that has been where it's been the last 35 or 40 years?
That's a outstanding question, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's troublesome because I'm a historian. I love the history of college football. I love the history of the Southeastern Conference. And I think that every single day that goes by, we're getting close to what you were just referring to. And I'm going to bring this up. So last year, I go back to the scheduling idea. The main reason why it was split last year of the 14 schools that were talking about it last year in the SEC, 7 of them was for going to a 9-game schedule. The other 7 was not. The ones that were not for going to an extra game was the smaller campuses around the Southeastern Conference. And it makes sense if you think about it. Every other year, towns like Starkville and Oxford, Mississippi, they would lose out of a home game. And when you're talking about communities and hotels and restaurants and the economic impact on those cities, it's a lot different when you're in Tuscaloosa, a city of over 100,000, or you're in Auburn, a city that's 75 to 80,000. And then you go to a place like Starkville and Oxford, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, Auburn, obviously they could withstand not having an additional home game. But when you're talking about every other year, them losing that big SEC team coming in on campus, that is a huge economic downfall. And so if you look at it, the bigger schools are saying, you know what, we're good. Let's just move forward because that's what's going to be the best for competition in this new expanded college football playoff. But you got the smaller schools, the smaller towns saying, no, we can't lose that additional game against Vanderbilt at home. We're looking at our own, coffers every single Saturday night, as opposed to looking down the road to what would potentially help you or the league out more by having that additional conference game. So to that point, I think we're a lot closer to that of being a conference, of really not really realizing what you used to have from the old school days of having those schools that helped implement this conference many years ago.
Yeah, because there are some in the other what you call now the Power 4 Autonomy 4 conferences who are bigger, better, faster, stronger than perhaps 2, 3, or 4 of the bottom of the teams in the SEC. And it just seems like that would be weird to leave them behind, but also some of those at the end of the SEC standings would be protected just because of originality. And I hope that we don't even get to that point. I hope that we can maybe stay at these 4 power school conferences for just enough to enjoy it before we do too much,
Yeah.
Which means by tomorrow that changes.
Yeah. Pat, what do you mentioned Jaden Rashada earlier. Billy Napier said that he was happy with or confident in his decision, or like whatever. I don't have the direct quote, but what do you make of how Florida now has to handle this going forward?
Well, it's interesting, guys, because in about another week or so, it's going to be the 1-year anniversary of the NCAA notifying Florida, hey, we're going to investigate you over Rashada and his recruitment. And here we are a year later. Just think of how much has changed within 1 year's time. And I think this thing's going to get slow played, guys. Rashada and his attorney, they keep saying, well, he didn't really want to sue him, but it was a situation where he's seeing a lot of players out there getting screwed over because of NIL, verbal deals that's just not coming to fruition. So he wants to be kind of a landmark case moving forward to give the players an extra protection if something does come down and he wins in court. But listen, at the end of the day, I think all of this is going to be taken care of. I think just like it's going to happen with the Florida States and the Clemsons of the world, they're going to be a mediator involved. At the end of the day, he's probably going to get a few $1 million. He's not going to get the $10 million that he's looking for. But I think this thing is going to go away sooner than later. This probably will never make the light of day of a courtroom. I think all parties involved will be able to take care of this in due time.
Pat, great stuff. As always, great stuff. 3-man front. Also, WJOX, a great radio station in Birmingham that covers the SEC and also college football. When we come back, the news yesterday about Bill